You first understand money by its absence, not as a theory, not as a headline, not as a lifestyle. You understand it in the small, humiliating places where life quietly asks a question and your family has learned to answer with restraint. The mechanic's bill, the school fee, the broken appliance, the wedding gift, the medical emergency no one planned for. In your world, money is never a symbol of freedom. It is a buffer against panic, a shield that might fail tomorrow, a thing people respect but never trust. And because of that, billionaires do not feel real to you. They feel like weather systems, like ancient emperors, like people born into a different atmosphere. Their decisions seem to happen above the level of ordinary life. Their mistakes are absorbed by systems. Their names are insulated by distance. Nobody in your family has ever met anyone like that, let alone become one. In your house, the ceiling was not ambition. The ceiling was stability, getting through the month, keeping dignity, staying alive to the next one. So when you imagine wealth, you do not imagine $1 billion. You imagine relief. You imagine your mother not worrying before opening the electricity bill. You imagine your father sleeping without calculating worst-case scenarios in the dark. You imagine a life where one bad month does not become a family legend. That is where your story begins, not with greed, with scarcity, with the quiet psychological architecture that scarcity builds inside a person long before they ever earn anything meaningful. Because when you grow up around survival, you learn something most wealthy people never have to learn. Money is emotional before it is numerical. It changes how you speak. It changes what you ask for. It changes what you think is possible for yourself. And then, one day, something cracks open.
It starts with a sentence you were never supposed to believe. Wealth is created, not inherited, not granted, not reserved for a certain bloodline. Created. At first, that idea feels almost offensive because it implies that the world you grew up in was not fixed. It implies the map was incomplete. It implies the gate was never locked. Nobody in your family just had the key. That realization can be more destabilizing than poverty itself, because poverty teaches limits, but opportunity teaches responsibility. Once you see the path, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice leverage, ownership, equity, distribution, systems, the things that quietly move wealth from one generation to the next, while everyone else argues about salaries and saving money. You realize that most people are taught to work for income, not to build assets. They are taught to survive inside the economy, not to own a piece of it. And now, you are different. Not better, just burdened with vision. You can still remember the old life, but you no longer belong to it in the same way. You start thinking in decades instead of weeks. You start studying how capital behaves, how ownership scales, how one decision can outwork 1,000 hours. While others see a job title, you see a system. While others see a paycheck, you see a ceiling. While others dream of spending more, you dream of building something that survives you. But dreaming is the easy part. The hard part is becoming the first person in your family to stop asking, "How do I get by?" and start asking, "What do I own?" That question changes everything. The first real opportunity does not look like a movie scene. It looks uncertain, small, unimpressive to people who still think in old categories. Maybe it is a business no one understands. Maybe it is a skill you learned obsessively while everyone else was distracted. Maybe it is a market inefficiency, a product, a service, an investment, a technology, a platform, a network. The form matters less than the pattern. You spot something before the crowd does, and because you've lived close to the edge, you understand risk differently. Poor families often teach caution as morality. Rich families teach it as strategy. You are forced to learn the strategy yourself. This is where your psychology begins to split from the people around you. They think in terms of safety, because safety has always been scarce. You think in terms of optionality, because you finally understand that optionality is the real luxury, the ability to wait, to choose, to refuse, to reinvest, to walk away.
The first opportunity is rarely glamorous. It often feels too slow, too uncertain, too small to matter. But you recognize something the people around you miss. Small assets can become large when they are attached to the right engine. Ownership compounds, reputation compounds, distribution compounds, trust compounds, cash flow compounds, even your ability to make better decisions compounds. The first opportunity does not just give you income, it changes your identity. For the first time, you are not merely participating in wealth, you are constructing it, and construction is lonely.
People begin to look at you strangely once your goals become serious. At first, it is subtle. The jokes change, the tone changes, the advice changes. Friends tell you to be realistic. Relatives tell you not to get too big for yourself. Someone you love says, be grateful for what you have. And they mean well, but the sentence lands like a warning, because gratitude and ambition are not enemies. But in a family shaped by scarcity, ambition can feel like betrayal. The outsider role begins here. You are still the same person, but your internal horizon has expanded beyond what people around you can comfortably understand. They see the downside of every move. You see the cost of staying still. They see risk as danger. You see risk as the price of escape. They measure success by consistency. You measure it by ownership, and that difference matters more than anyone admits. The psychology of the outsider is not arrogance, it is isolation mixed with discipline. It is waking up every day and carrying a vision that cannot be validated by the room you're in. It is learning not to need applause from people who do not see the same future. It is having to build confidence from evidence, not from agreement. There are nights when this feels unbearable. You will wonder whether you're becoming cold, whether ambition has made you harder to love, whether your family will ever forgive you for leaving the old definition of normal behind. But the truth is harsher and cleaner than that. Growth always creates distance, not because you stop caring, but because your life starts moving in a direction that requires different laws. The outsider pays a social tax. You miss some comfort to gain some destiny, and still you continue. Because once you've seen what wealth can do, not as luxury, but as leverage, you cannot go back to pretending that survival is enough. The first million arrives like a storm that does not fully announce itself. For most people, the number is mythical. For you, it is deeply personal. It represents years of delayed gratification, strange decisions, failed attempts, long nights, and the psychological violence of believing in something before the world agrees. When it finally happens, you expect fireworks. You expect joy to scale with the number. It does not. It feels good, yes, better than good. It feels like proof, but it does not feel complete. That is the secret no one tells you about crossing a major threshold. The external celebration is often larger than the internal one. The first million changes your life materially. It reduces pressure, it expands options, it makes emergencies less terrifying. It allows better decisions because desperation no longer sits at the table. You can think more clearly when fear is not consuming every move. But psychologically, it exposes you, because now you know the game is real. You know what discipline can do. You know what leverage can do. You know that the difference between fantasy and reality is not talent alone, but structure, patience, and persistence. And once you know that, a million stops feeling like a finish line. It becomes a receipt for your capacity to build. You begin to notice a strange emotional shift. Things that once felt impossible now feel merely inconvenient. You no longer dream in rescue narratives. You dream in systems. You begin asking how to protect wealth, how to multiply it, how to stop exchanging time for value at the same rate forever. The first million gives you oxygen. It does not give you meaning, so you keep building. This is the season where your life stops being about effort alone and starts being about design.
You learn that the most important wealth is not the money you earn while working, it is the money your systems make when you are not present. A business that can sell without your hand on every detail. An investment structure that grows while you sleep. A team that functions because the rules are clear. A process that outlives your mood. This is where you begin to think like an owner instead of an operator. And the change is deeper than finance. It is identity surgery. An operator measures worth by how busy they are. A builder measures worth by what continues without them. An operator chases constant motion. A builder chases durable architecture. One burns energy, the other stores it. You become obsessed with alignment, with incentives, with margin, with people who are competent without being fragile, with assets that don't require your daily emotional labor. You stop romanticizing hustle because you understand the hidden weakness in endless effort. If everything depends on you, nothing is truly scalable. Wealth begins compounding when your decisions create institutions, not just income. And that changes the way you experience time. You stop living day to day. You start living in cycles. Build, reinforce, reinvest, protect, expand, repeat. The compounding is not just financial, it is psychological. Confidence grows because systems prove themselves. Fear shrinks because you are no longer a single point of failure. Your life becomes less like a sprint and more like a machine designed to preserve momentum. But with that growth comes a new loneliness, because now even your habits are incomprehensible to people who still think wealth comes from luck.
The wealth gap is not just about numbers. It is about reality. At some point, you enter a life your relatives cannot parse, not because they are ignorant, but because their mental model of the world was built in a different economy. They understand rent, salaries, bills, debt, small savings, cautious dreams. You understand cash flow statements, asset allocation, business risk, tax strategy, capital formation, succession, leverage, and the emotional cost of being responsible for things larger than yourself.
The wealth gap is not just about numbers. It is about reality. At some point, you enter a life your relatives cannot parse, not because they are ignorant, but because their mental model of the world was built in a different economy. They understand rent, salaries, bills, debt, small savings, cautious dreams. You understand cash flow statements, asset allocation, business risk, tax strategy, capital formation, succession, leverage, and the emotional cost of being responsible for things larger than yourself.
Money changes the conversation, but what really changes is the silence around the conversation. People stop being honest with you in the same way. Some become careful, some become entitled, some begin to test the boundaries of your generosity. Others pull away because your success forces them to measure their own life against a standard they never consented to. The family dinner is still the same table, but the invisible geometry has changed. You can no longer speak casually about numbers. A mistake you make can fund someone else's resentment. A decision you make can become someone else's expectation. Even kindness becomes complicated when your abundance starts to look infinite to people who have never seen that much space. This is one of the loneliest parts of wealth, the moment you realize that money does not simply buy comfort, it also distorts perception. You become cautious with words, cautious with gifts, cautious with rescue, not because you love less, but because you finally understand that unmanaged generosity can destroy both sides. And so you learn one of the most difficult lessons in financial psychology. Boundaries are a form of respect. You are no longer trying to prove that you are still one of them. You are trying to carry the difference without becoming cruel. That is harder. That is rarer.
The $1 billion threshold is not a larger version of the million. It is a different moral universe. At that scale, money stops being a personal comfort object. It becomes infrastructure. It becomes employment. It becomes influence. It becomes the ability to fund experiments that might change markets, communities, institutions, even generations. Every decision has a second and third order effect. A mistake is not just expensive, it is consequential. This is where the psychology of ownership becomes serious.
You understand that wealth is no longer a trophy you hold. It is a force you manage. Your attention changes, your pace changes, your fear changes. You are less interested in display and more interested in durability.
less interested in looking rich and more interested in staying powerful without becoming reckless, less interested in temporary admiration and more interested in permanent structure. The first billion makes one truth unavoidable. The weight of your choices now extends beyond your own life. People depend on your judgment. Employees, partners, communities, families that do not know your name but feel your decisions. The money is not just yours in any emotional sense anymore. It is attached to responsibility, and responsibility scales faster than ego can.
This is where many people break. Some become isolated by their own success. Some become paranoid. Some become performative. Some lose the human shape of their life in the process of protecting the machine that made it. But if you are careful, the first billion does something different. It strips away illusion. It forces clarity. It tells you exactly what your values are when the stakes are too large to lie about them. At that point, money is no longer about comfort. It is about consequence, and you finally understand that consequence is the real language of power. One day, your family history divides itself into two eras, before you, after you. Not because you were the loudest person in the room, not because you chased status, not because you wanted to be worshipped, but because you changed the economic physics of your bloodline. You made a path where there had been none. You converted fear into structure. You turned survival into strategy. You transformed one generation's limits into the next generation's starting line. This is what legacy actually is. Not a name on a building, not a headline, not applause. Legacy is when the children that come after you inherit options instead of trauma. When financial panic is no longer the family religion. When people who used to live reactively begin to live intentionally. When your success becomes boring in the healthiest way possible because it has become normalized.
And yet, the final lesson is not triumph. It is humility. Because once you have built that much, you can see how fragile everything remains. Wealth can protect a family, but it can also soften it. It can restore dignity, but it can also awaken greed. It can create peace, but only if wisdom grows faster than balance sheets. A first billionaire in a family is not just a financial event. It is a test of character across generations. So the real victory is not the number. It is whether the number made you larger or only louder. Whether wealth made you more isolated or more useful. Whether you became a monument to escape or a foundation for permanence. And in the end, that is what your story means. You were never just trying to get rich. You were trying to end an old conversation.
The one that said your family's life would always be defined by what it could not afford. The one that treated survival as destiny. The one that confused poverty with identity. You did not just earn money. You rewrote the emotional vocabulary of everyone who comes after you. That is why the first billion matters. Not because it lets you buy more, because it lets your family finally imagine less fear, more time, and a future that does not apologize for existing. And once that happens, the bloodline does not simply remember you. It reorganizes itself around you.